Now we'll talk about doing division problems, but doing them by estimating and rounding. People don't do long division by hand very much these days. The long division process is cumbersome. There's a lot of steps. It takes a long time. And the more steps you do in a problem, the more opportunities there are to make a mistake. So it tends to be error prone just because it's a long and tedious process. Calculators today are very common and easy to come by and even pretty cheap now. And so that's the preferred method for doing long division. People typically do it on a calculator. However, there's a lot of times when you don't need an exact answer, and your calculator typically gives you an exact or very close to exact answer. But a lot of times you don't need an exact answer. You can just get an estimate that will be sufficient and very useful, and you can do it quickly and easily. If you take the numbers that you're dividing and you round them, you might be able to round them and produce a problem that's a lot simpler, where you can do the division a lot more easily, perhaps even in your head. And sometimes it's very appropriate to round. We'll take a look at an example. A flight from New York to London travels 3,471 miles. A typical commercial airliner travels at about 530 miles per hour. How many hours should the trip take? Well, we want to do 3,471 divided by 530. But instead, I'm just going to round. I'm going to take, instead of 3,471, I'll just say 3,000. And instead of 530, I'll say 500. And you might be able to do that in your head. 3,000 divided by 500 is 6. And this is in hours. So it'll take about 6 hours. Now note that in this case, it's very reasonable to divide rounded numbers. The distance might not be exact. Planes take various different paths through the sky. They adjust their course for the weather, or they adjust their course as air traffic control tells them to because of other traffic in the sky. And the 530 miles an hour is not an exact number either. Some planes fly faster, some fly slower. If there's a headwind, it will slow the plane down. If there's a tailwind, it will speed it up. So 530 isn't exact either. Neither of these numbers are really exact, so we can't really expect an exact answer. We're going to have an approximately correct answer, so it makes sense to use approximately correct numbers, rounded numbers in this case. Rounding, as you know, uses approximate numbers, so the result is just an approximation, and that's reasonable in this case. Now note also here that the 3,471 got rounded down, and the 530 got rounded down, and that's good that these both rounded the same way, because we have a smaller number divided by another smaller number. Those errors in this case tend to cancel each other out. If they rounded differently, if one rounded bigger and one rounded smaller, we could have had a more substantial error. This one ends up being pretty close. If you actually do 3,471 divided by 530, I'll pull up the calculator here. 3,471 divided by 530, I get about 6.55. So I'll write that in. That's 6.55. So that's pretty close. My 6-hour estimate is pretty close to what we would actually get if we rounded those numbers. We wouldn't expect it to really take 6.55 hours though, because we don't expect the plane to go exactly 530 miles per hour for 3,471 miles. But just pointing out that our estimate does come out to a number reasonably close to what we did if we worked out the long division by hand, which would take a while, or if we did it by a calculator. So if you don't have a calculator with you, in a lot of cases, it's appropriate just to get an approximate answer.